We're talking future this morning. We've had the future of governance, the future of Tottenham Hotspur, and now a really fascinating area of development in sport, the future of fantasy sport. And to moderate this session, I'd like you to welcome my colleague Malcolm Coles, Director of Digital Media at the Telegraph Media Group. Morning, Malcolm.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to welcome my guests, Rufus Hack from the PGA Europe and Jeffrey Haas from DraftKings. I thought I would let them introduce themselves, and I'm sure they can do a better job than me. Do you want to go first, Jeffrey?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks for your interest in fantasy sports and coming to spend some time with us today. My name is Jeffrey Haas. I'm the Chief International Officer of a company called DraftKings, which was founded in 2012 and launched in the UK in February. And we're in the process of establishing a new category here, which we'll talk about as the day goes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rufus Hack. I look after the media and digital operations at the European Tour. We run about 100 golf events across the world and have members like Rory McIlroy, Justin Rose and the like. And our biggest event is coming up in October with the Ryder Cup.
Cool. And I used to play, I'm slightly giving my age away here, I used to play a fantasy game about 30 years ago involving fake footballers, not even tied to the real football. And I used to put a thing in an envelope and post it every 2 weeks with a £1 postal order. And I'd get the results back. That would be great. It was even social, because if you found a friend who did it, then you could play friendlies and improve how your players went. Things have obviously moved on a lot since then. How do you see some of the sort of changes in the consumption of sport? What's the sort of drivers there that are influencing the sort of rise of fantasy games, would you say?
I mean, for us at the European Tour, one thing we're absolutely cognizant of is the fact that sports media consumption is being transformed and will be over the next couple of years. If we look at how linear broadcast is evolving, I think the stats where it's down 10 or 15% or so in terms of broadcast minutes over the last year. And that's just going to continue to extend. And the way we're looking at it is fans are moving from watching sport to immersing themselves in sport and looking for more second screen experiences. And there's 5-10 products out there which can be these second screen experiences, but fantasy sports is an excellent way of being one of those.
Cool. And is it a sort of rise of mobile, you think, that as you know, it kind of brings all these things together in many ways?
Mobile and social. I think social in terms of media consumption was up about 60% last year, and particularly with Facebook now allowing more live streaming of videos and the branded content on there. We think that probably over the next few years or so, digital will become the primary way in which fans consume sports media, and that has massive implications for the sports industry and how us as sports rights holders monetize our content.
And Jeffrey, your company is a daily fantasy platform, yes? And what is the difference, I guess, for those who don't know, between sort of daily and sort of season-long games?
Well, traditional season-long fantasy sports have been around for almost 30 years. In the UK, as you said, about 25 years ago, you can rip a page out of the Telegraph, fill in the different squares with the players you want and send it in. And then if a player were injured, you would have to send an amendment in. And what you're doing is the only way to keep your roster up to speed and to stay competitive is to play every single week. And then typically after 6 or 7 weeks, the people who are going to have a very good roster will know that, and everybody else stops being interested. So the disengagement rate can be upwards of 70%, massive churn. People just fall off from traditional season-long fantasy sports. And daily fantasy sports is a natural outgrowth of season long. We give players the opportunity to play every day if they want to, and if they don't want to play, they don't have to. It is an opportunity to use their skill in order to be the best football manager. Really, everybody wants to be the best. Everybody thinks they are the best, not only amongst their friends and their colleagues, but sometimes you want to test your skills around people all over the world. And we've provided them with an experience to do that, not only in football, but we have 11 different sports available in our product. So what you're doing is you're choosing a number of real-world athletes, putting together a lineup or a fantasy roster, and then you enter that into a contest against your friends or colleagues, etc. And then you earn fantasy points based on real sporting events and the points that your athletes score, and the person with the most points in your team in that contest will be the one that wins.
Cool. And it's called daily. Is that because you just can play any sport every day? Because like football tends to happen once a week still.
Well, it is. I mean, we do have some weekly games. Golf events typically run over 4 days, so people will draft their lineup on Thursday mornings and then follow along during the course of the event. But our product is very engaging. We talked about the move towards mobile, as well as the increasing consumption of digital. What we're doing is we provide a fantastic experience for somebody who is playing this game to become more engaged with the sport they're following, either an event live or on TV, because what we're doing is we're providing real-time updates through a mobile device, and we provide a second screen experience. So the people who are sitting there in the pub watching Liverpool win the Europa League next Wednesday night are going to be getting real-time updates on their phone to see the stats from all of the players they've drafted in that match. And this provides incredible engagement level because people just really enjoy that experience. It makes consumption of sport more interesting, and people like doing that with their friends in a very significant way.
I mean, we've actually, just to chip in there, Malcolm, we've seen that in terms of our season-long fantasy. We start with about 30,000 people at the start of the year, and that does normally go down to about 12, 15,000 at the end of the year. So I think increasingly, particularly millennials, but actually I think it's across all demographics, we're looking for instant gratification. And I think daily fantasy plays into some of those socio trends really, really well. And I mean, that's one thing that we're absolutely looking to do over the next few weeks or so, actually, to launch a daily fantasy game, because we think it's going to be critical.
And how do you think it changes you as a rights holder and what your business is? Because I guess traditionally your customers were sort of directly the sports people and the broadcasters you would sell rights to. Are you looking to become more of a B2C company and have more of a direct relationship with the consumers of the product?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of sports rights holders have been going through this transition over the last couple of years or so from a B2B company where the vast majority of income is from sponsorship and from broadcasters to actually realising we're going to get disintermediated unless we have that direct relationship with the consumer. And in order to provide values to our broadcasters and drive eyeballs and to drive value to our sponsor partners, we need to be able to help them activate. So yeah, absolutely, having that long-term relationship with the consumer is absolutely critical. And I think sports rights holders are going to increasingly want to own that conversation moving forward.
Cool. And you've come over to the company's come over to the UK from the US. What are the sort of, so you've been there longer, what are the sort of big lessons I guess you've learned from the US, and how are you seeing things different in the UK?
We have to use the letter U when we spell color. It's a matter of parlance and lexicon, definitely in respect to communication. Clearly the easy one is it's not soccer, it's football. But we've had to make a lot of changes to our product. We also held extensive focus groups over almost 6 months with our product to get feedback from players on what it is we're doing, how we're communicating it, and how the product resonates. And most of the feedback we listened to as far as making changes, but some of it we couldn't make certain changes because of the nature of our ecosystem. We're a global sports engagement brand, and what we do is give players an opportunity to not only compete with friends and family and colleagues, but people around the world. As such, the currency of our games right now is US dollars, and people in the UK really want to play in pounds sterling, but there's an opportunity to compete against hundreds of thousands of other people in specific contests, and they do understand that. So there are some impediments towards getting people on board and engaged with our brand and our product, but as it's occurring, we're seeing significant economies of scale kick in as far as the size of our contests. You know, we have more than 250,000 people who are playing football, proper football games on our product. Major League Soccer, Europa League, Champions League, we'll add La Liga next season. And you know, of that 250,000, we have tens of thousands of people in the UK playing, and the vast majority in the US. So I would say the strongest players in football are likely in the UK, but maybe the strongest players in other sports are going to be in the United States. So there's an opportunity to play more British sports, and some expats and people who are discovering those sports here will also be playing American sports. But it's also an opportunity for us to introduce our partners to an American audience. We have almost 7 million players on our platform, vast majority in the US. We work with Liverpool and Arsenal. You know, we run promotions with them that we're promoting to our American and our Canadian customers, and they're very excited about that, the opportunity to go to Anfield Stadium and watch a game, for example. So what we're doing is leveraging our existing profile across 3 countries, and you know, we intend to expand further than that, and helping people discover new sports and fall in love with them.
And do you see a difference in how many types of sports people play between the two markets? I tend to think of America as being sort of hockey, baseball, and American football. And in Britain, I guess maybe soccer is football is quite dominant in terms of media coverage, etc. Is there a difference in sort of people crossing over into other sports in the two markets?
Our expectations coming into the UK were that 80 to 90% of our business would be based on football. That's not proven to be the case. Football is only, I would say, 50 to 60% of our business. And the remainder is people discovering new sports and finding them really interesting. But also, golf is a global sport. People everywhere love that. And I will say, as we increase our footprint, that'll expand for us. But it's also amazing for me to see the people who are interested in Major League Baseball and NBA in the UK. Clearly, American sports leagues have been investing for years here. The NFL have been here for 10 years. They sell out all of their games. This year there's 3, 2 at Wembley and 1 at Twickenham. They'll be sold out. The NBA sold out at O2 in January. That has resulted in the development of new fan bases here, and they're finding our product a great way to engage in the sport they love.
It is an interesting one for golf, because I think if you think about fancy sports, the ones that leap out at you are football, rugby, the things which are over in 80, 90 minutes or so, whereas golf, like Test cricket, has faced the problem of we've got 4 days and there's a lot of wallpaper before you get the heat moments down the last 9 holes on a Sunday. But actually, one of the great things about having products like the fantasy sports is that rather than just your broadcast numbers flatlining for 3.5 days and then spiking at the end, it makes every day and every shot matter, and it gives that emotional intensity for consumers to actually want to engage with the game.
Yeah, I agree. But people want to follow not just the clubs they support, but the players who are in their rosters.
Cool. And so I guess that's kind of where we are at the moment. If you think about the future, the gentleman there asked about where Tottenham would be in 20 years. Sort of personal, so data is obviously important to fantasy sports. Is there rise of sort of personal biometric data, I guess, heart rates of players, or is that all a bit too sort of instant for what's supposed to be a sort of set your players and see how they perform? Do you see the rise of sort of ways of understanding sort of in the moment of matches influencing it?
I think the big thing that we're seeing in terms of all media at the moment is convergence. So probably in 2 or 3 years, the vast majority of people will consume sports content through their mobile phone, and they will have the live stream, they will have the commentary, they'll have the data, they'll have the social, and they'll have some form of gaming there. And as that convergence continues, the rise and the ease of being able to play these different products is just going to increase. And then if we layer on things like VR, which have been talked about for a long time, and the more immersive experiences, I think once we look back on how people have been consuming sports media over the last 5 or 10 years, in 5 years' time, we'll find it quite archaic, because I think it is going to be a very different world in terms of how we engage with sports contents and our favourite teams and sports.
Yeah, look at what Opta has done here since they've really started, collecting all the data and providing it available to, a wide range of not only media companies, but technology companies and consumer entertainment companies. By having access to more data points, we're able to create more enriching products that people can engage in. And we see that across, all areas of sport. So I think that as biometric data becomes available, providing the privacy issues around that are resolved around the players, I think that, the only limits are our imagination as far as the experiences we can provide consumers.
Cool. And how do you see the differences between countries and between sports in terms of their sort of attitude to performance sort of data? Are the different sports sort of more sort of willing to open up? And football's been open via Opta for quite a long time, hasn't it? In terms of are different sports different, and the different countries offer different levels of data, or?
Well, I would say that there's a different level of sophistication from rights holders around the world as far as their infrastructure and level of willingness to invest in data collection. And as we're looking further afield towards opportunities to establish our category, and in discussions with different leagues, we see some people collecting only a very base level of data and other people taking a far more forward-looking view. You look at the AFL and the NRL in Australia, for example. They're really progressive in their use. And I know that the Euro Tour are looking at, taking steps to collect more data and make that available to different organizations. I see that to some extent it's cultural from the business side, and on the consumer side, it is also cultural and historic. You know, Major League Baseball, the sports omnivores in the United States can tell you every stat about every game that's occurred in the last 100 years. Whereas, you know, if you start talking about rugby or cricket here, you know, there's some level of familiarity around it, but it's not as widespread.
And Rufus, have you had to think about the data you provide as part of your thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, consumers are crying out for more data in golf, and golf's probably the hardest sport in order to collect data, given how big a golf course is and the logistical difficulties of not having fixed stadia and moving week on week and year on year as well. I mean, for us, it's critical for our broadcasters that we provide better data. It's critical for our sponsors because they want to align behind themes which can be supported by data, and then also our consumers to provide data for products like fantasy and potentially other products. So it's something that we're having to take the hit on in terms of short-term investment, but we believe it's going to be pretty fundamental to our business model moving forward.
Have you put chips in the golf balls yet?
We actually have thought about that, and we've discussed it with the RNA, but anyone here who knows the RNA know they're not a particularly quick-moving organisation. So one thing we have been looking at is potentially putting chips on the inside. I don't know how many golfers we've got in the room, on the inside of just on the shafts, so you know which club they're using, how far each ball's gone, etc., etc. But yeah, I mean, innovation in this space is bound to happen.
Cool. And from your point of view in the future, I mean, what's the overlap between sort of fantasy gaming and betting in terms of the audience for you? Is it for you opening up new audiences, or is it trying to get better engagement from people in the future who already interact with you in some way? I
mean, betting is a really hard subject for a sports rights holder to deal with. I mean, I'm sure everyone's sort of seen the publicity around the ATP and other sports bodies who have licensed their data over the last few years or so.
Is this the attraction of daily fantasy to you, that you avoid some of those?
I mean, daily fantasy offers a pretty low risk way to do it because it's pool betting, so you've got 6 or 7 players, and so the player integrity issue doesn't come up so much. I think as a sports rights holder, we need to be grown up in terms of betting. I mean, we did a consumer survey recently, and 40% of all golf fans are betting on golf. So the market's out there. We just have to be careful that we're protecting our players, and the player integrity is utmost in what we do. And that's one of the reasons we like things like daily fantasy, because with 6 or 7 players, it doesn't put into question the player's integrity so much.
Cool. And then thinking of the future again, how do you grow the category? I mean, presumably you want lots more customers and lots more sports, but how do you go about growing that category in somewhere like the UK?
Well, hopefully everybody here will go home tonight and with a cup of tea, download DraftKings.co.uk account. We have golf events starting every Thursday morning, but also this Sunday is the last day of the Premier League, and of course you all want to see what I'm talking about as far as this engaging experience is concerned. Really what we need to do is educate consumers about a new category, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge because, you know, attitudes are rather entrenched. Media costs are very expensive here, and the incumbent operators in the space are typically the largest media companies. Telegraph, clearly the Sun have the Dream Team FC. We have the Premier League itself with its own fantasy product. That restricts our ability to efficiently and cost-effectively reach consumers in meaningful ways. So we have to be really creative. And we brought on board, I don't know if you know Jimmy Bullard, he's a former footballer and also had his PGA golf card for a while. You know, he's an amazing personality, and we use him socially through a number of different campaigns to really amplify our messaging. And he's helped us reach a lot of people. But we also have great partnerships with Liverpool and Arsenal and Watford we've worked with this season as well. And through their various channels and the hospitality they provide to us, we're able to talk to consumers in a meaningful way. And what we're finding is when people discover our product and our platform and have a chance to play, they love it. And so it's very, very sticky for us here. And even though we only have tens of thousands of people here who are playing, it is the very basis for what we want to do when we grow.
Cool. And Rufus, how did you go about thinking about sort of doing daily fantasy? Did you want to build a product yourself, or were you looking to partner with someone? What are the sort of factors you took into account when sort of trying to make this decision?
I mean, ultimately for us, it was about how do we get at scale quickly. And to get to scale quickly, going with an incumbent operator gave us the sort of the database, the game, the technology, the infrastructure to do that quickly. And so we could have spent a year, 18 months developing our own product, but we thought actually we think this space is moving quickly and we're better off to partner and work with someone who had the experience in this area.
And then how do you go about telling your customers that it exists?
Primarily just through our digital platforms. So we have great reach through social. We get about 15 million reach a week through our Facebook platform and other platforms. So I think that's a great way of engaging. And then we can also cross-sell to our incumbent season-long game as well, because obviously those guys are people who potentially have an appetite for these sort of products.
And do you see daily eclipsing the season-long one?
I actually think they work quite well complementary. I think at the start of the year you can select your season-long game. That'll be the thing which you put on the sort of the back burner, and then the daily fantasy is your sort of heat moments and spikes throughout the year. I mean, for us it's probably less daily and more tournament-based. So you put on a team on the Thursday morning, and then you'd see how that goes through Sunday. But to Jeffrey's point earlier, one of the nice things about fantasy is you have a sort of a daily fantasy, a live leaderboard and scoreboard. So you can see that you're currently 10,328th. And then when you're bored 2 minutes later at work, you can see you've popped down to 11,000. And that sort of live social piece where you can play against friends, you get real-time insight in terms of your performance, I think is quite compelling for fans.
Yeah, and I fully agree with the strategy of cross-sell from season-long to daily. We work with the Telegraph right now on your season-long fantasy football product, and a lot of Telegraph fans are very interested in playing our daily product, but that hasn't necessarily diminished their consumption of the season-long product.
Yeah, so I tend to be the sort of season-long product who sets my team up on day one and then forgets to make any changes the whole time. That's great. Questions from the audience. If you could let the microphone get to you before you ask any, and if you could maybe tell us who you are as well as your question. Excellent. First one over there.
Hi, Matt from Fast Track. From a DraftKings point of view, are you worried about legislation in the States migrating over here when it comes to betting?
Every jurisdiction, every country around the world takes its own view on our activities and on how they choose to look at a game of skill. In the UK, regulation here based on the UKGC policies are unequivocal in that our game is pool betting, and as such it's subject to those regulations. If we want to have a contest, regardless of the skill element, where somebody pays an entry fee and wins a prize, we require a license here. As we start looking at other territories, the various regulators and authorities and legislators will take differing views. Malta, for example, has recently introduced skill gaming legislation, which is going to create two new classes of licenses for skill games, one for esports and the other for fantasy sports, including both season-long and daily. Denmark has recently passed legislation clarifying that daily fantasy sports are a game of skill. Nevertheless, it's subject to regulation by the regulator there. The same story in France and in Italy. So it varies as you start looking on a more global basis. My hope is that while they are looking to regulate our activities, they put in place very low tax rates.
Have you seen those go together, regulation and tax?
Well,
that's the second question there.
Hello, Mal from Strive Sponsorship. Yesterday we heard about esports, and the gentleman earlier mentioned about, for one betting company in the UK, it's their second largest income stream. Obviously, with yourselves, being largely online and the esports community being largely online, I think you operate in League of Legends, if I'm correct. How does that compare as a business opportunity for you compared to more traditional sports? And how do you see that evolving?
We love esports. So today we have League of Legends online. The intent moving forward is to add Counter-Strike, Death of the Ancients, and a number of other games that are very popular amongst a certain demographic. What we found in the UK is that is not an acquisition funnel for us for players. People who have heard about us through social channels and communities have come to play esports. We're very happy to make that product available. We imagine it'll expand over time, but it would be well less than 1% of our business here in the UK. Because that's not what the population love. I mean, people want to play football and golf.
Great. Was there a question over there?
It's Peter from The Diploma. We run a sponsorship training course, and so this is a sponsorship question, really. I'm quite surprised, although I think maybe this is future growth, that sponsorship hasn't yet been very integrated into fantasy sports. And bearing in mind that sponsors are looking for content all the time, I think the addition of a fantasy product to many sponsorship propositions is a significant growth area. Do you agree with that statement?
Sure. The sponsorship opportunities around fantasy sports they're only limited by the creativity of the approach, right? And the rights holder who's selling the sponsorship or the operator itself can have ideas, and you sit down and you work them out. And we've had the opportunities in the UK to work with the NFL International Series, Liverpool, Watford, and Arsenal. And the level of creativity they bring is, what we end up producing in respect to assets. We created some phenomenal social videos with Arsenal around some of their first team playing keepy-uppy with a putter and a golf ball around the Masters that occurred about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And that was seen by, a few 100,000 people here in the UK. Which was a very successful viral integration. We're also using ticketing, especially around Liverpool's great performance in the Europa League, in order to create VIP experiences for our players, and they love that. It's not just for our VIP players, but it's also for the average person who's playing a free-to-enter contest and wins a ticket. This is fantastic for Liverpool to promote to their audience base, to encourage them to play on DraftKings, which of course is our objective in our sponsorship investment. But it's also for the general population of our players, not only in the UK but internationally, to find that. So I think that there may not have been great examples of that in the past, but we're seeing it increase in the UK. And certainly what's happened in the US is a phenomenal example. I mean, Major League Baseball with their advanced media, probably one of the most sophisticated sports companies in the world when it comes to data integration, rights management. We have really meaningful integration with them from a mobile app perspective as well as a website perspective, and we're able to create a lot of value there. So, I think we're still at the beginning of something, but it's going to become a more robust and integrated experience moving forward. And, there will be examples of that as well. It'll be interesting to see what Euro Tour Golf do with their new daily fantasy product, and what level of integration they may choose to add to their digital properties and their broadcast.
I mean, I think it is an interesting one. I think as sports rights holders, I don't know how many sports rights holders are in the room, but we have been slightly behind the curve in terms of we've been selling sponsorship packages for platforms rather than selling sponsorship narratives. And once you move that conversation to say to a BMW, you're going to be our innovation partner, you then think about what are the different assets or platforms we have in which we can get that message out. And one of those will be broadcast, one of those will be social, one of those will be our website. And different products like this, like the fantasy sport, should absolutely be one of those components that you're using to get that brand narrative out to consumers.
Yeah, the rights holder and the fantasy sports operator have shared goals. The intent is to increase engagement in a sport so that the audience grows and that they're able to realize, a better return on the investment. And as long as those two bodies are working together, it can be very successful mutually.
You also share. You have a lot of data. Which is obviously quite valuable, and I can imagine quite a lot of sponsors wanting to share names, addresses, lists, whatever that may be. What's your kind of philosophy on that?
Well, if anybody here represents a large database of UK players, please come talk to me afterwards. Of course, we're interested in data. And as far as our data and the richness of our experience, I talked about the 7 million players we have on our platform. In the United States, we're now accepting advertising. You're going to see some really interesting diversification in our revenue model on an international basis moving forward. Because we talked about regulation earlier. There will be some territories where we cannot offer pay-to-play games. In which case, should we not offer our product there, or should we rethink the fundamentals of our business model? I think the latter is going to come into effect in some places.
But I think as a sports rights holder, data is going to become increasingly critical. And in terms of the fantasy sports, in any relationships that we're undertaking in the future, we have to own that data. Because if we abdicate the responsibility to that data, then again, there's the risk of us become disintermediated, and we want to own those relationships with the end consumer.
Cool. Any questions? There's one here.
Hi, Matt from Beyond 90. You mentioned earlier about second screen viewing, and yourself mentioned about having chips potentially in the shaft of the golf club. What is next? Where's the limit? Could it be that it's like a player cam, maybe a head cam for the next shot? What do you guys want to see next for those guys that take part in this daily sport?
We have a group of very hungry developers in a research lab in Boston who only get out when they have a great idea. So we'll see what comes.
I mean, in terms of innovation more broadly, I think in the golfing world, we're cognizant of the fact that we've been doing 72-hole stroke play without enough innovation for a long time. And actually, we've got a big event coming up in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be trialling a few new innovations, like potentially having caddy cams like the rugby referees have, looking at the chips on the shafts of the golf club, and also just exploring new things to do with data. So the Tour de France, people have, the King of the Mountains has his green jersey, the best sprinter has the polka dot. Or is that the wrong way around? But and they have the jersey. We're thinking about doing something similar with the caddies. So the longest driver, the caddies, has a certain colour. The best sand saves caddy has a certain colour. Just to try and give the audience and fans other reasons to engage. And I think all of these pieces around why does every shot matter? Should you tune in on Thursday at 4 p.m. to watch? I think all of this data and these different products all combine to create another appointment of view for some fans.
Yeah, and constant innovation, trying things, and if they don't work, reiterating or trying something new. Look what the NHL did with the neon lights that followed the puck on the ice. They tried that and it didn't work, but it was a really brave concept because people do sometimes have trouble following the puck.
Any more from the audience? I have a couple of follow-up questions, I guess. What's your focus, Jeffrey? Is it sort of deepening the product around individual sports, adding more features or functionality, or are you trying to go, never ask either or questions, you'll just say both, but are you trying to go broader and get more and more sports on board? What's your sort of
We want
focus?
to be deeper and broader. I would say the focus right now is becoming deeper as far as the level of engagement we provide to players with more data, more contest variety, richer opportunities to challenge friends, to create more social layers for the product. You recognize that, everybody wants to be the best football manager, but what's really important is to be better than your friends, and better than your workmates. So you have bragging rights, and we want to be able to facilitate that by creating a deeper experience. Down the road, we will add rugby, we will add cricket, we'll add other games as well, but I think that the opportunity right now is to create the best possible daily fantasy sports product in order for us to grow our reach.
And is there any sort of tension between you as a platform and, I don't want to start a row on the panel, and you as a sports body, in that if the data gets licensed by the sports bodies, you can build fantasy games presumably without the direct involvement of the rights holder. And you presumably license your data, do you? If you think of football, lots of people have built products on top of Opta, for instance. Is there a sort of tension, do you see, in the future between rights holders distributing data and then seeing other platforms build products on top of it?
Yeah, I mean, there absolutely.
Am I inventing this fight?
There absolutely is. I mean, data is omnipresent now, and with people like Opta and other data companies, data can be scraped from websites, and even at our golf courses, we often have people collecting data for third-party purposes. I think
do you allow them to do this? Or?
We don't officially, but it's very hard to crack down on it. So absolutely it is a risk that people are collecting data and then monetizing that externally away from the sports rights holder. I think the reason we think that the game that is associated with the sports rights holder will come to the top is because effectively we have all of the channels of promotion to promote it. So we have our social platforms, we have our digital platforms, we have the relationships with a worldwide network of broadcasters like the Skies, the Golf Channels, etc. And if you're constantly drumming that message into the fan and into the consumer, it makes it a lot easier to get traction around that product.
Cool. And is this a tension you see in the future?
We help sports rights holders increase their audience size. We drive a lot of discovery for fans of one sport to another. One might even argue that some rights holders should be paying us to add products on their sports.
Okay. Let's see if I can see any enthusiasm in the audience for these suggestions. There's a question over there.
Hi, Nick Beasley from Oliver & Olbaum. I was just wondering, on the golf side of things, and monetising your digital assets and the strategy, how much of an intrinsic barrier is being a predominantly individual sport compared to a team sport, and not having those brands that naturally attract big groups of fans that have an emotional attachment, and whether or not that means that you can never reach the levels of football and the big US sports. And then going on, as you mentioned, to the Ryder Cup, does that make that a much easier asset to monetize from a digital point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I suppose we don't have the tribal thing that you get in team sports other than the Ryder Cup. And if you look at the statistics we have around the Ryder Cup, I mean, we have 100 million hits on our website just on the Ryder Cup week alone. So it is massive and it is a genuinely global property. I think what we need to do, and what we do try to do, is to raise the profile of our members. So it is somewhat up and down in terms of our events, but when you have Rory McIlroy, Justin Rose, all of those guys playing, you can build a narrative and stories around them, and people engage with that. It is slightly harder at the South African Open when you've only got the number 123rd person in the world. Then you have to create stories around other interesting stuff. Interestingly, our top 3 content pieces last year were nothing to do with Rory winning the BMW or countdown to the Ryder Cup. One of them was that we had a baboon that was set free on the fairway on the 13th, an event in Mauritius. And the other was when one of our members, who's number 220 in the world, got down on his knee on the 18th green and proposed to his girlfriend. So I think that there's a learning to us there of, yes, it's great to have the best sports content in the world, and yes, you need to have that tribal nature and the team aspect, but actually you can be a bit more creative in terms of how you use your stars, your content, your platforms to create engagement with consumers.
Great. And then I guess final question from me, what does success look like for each of you in, say, 12 months' time? If you come back here and talk about it again, what are you hoping the next 12 months will have achieved for you?
That when people hear daily fantasy sports, they say, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I was playing with my friends last weekend and beat them. And I had tried both the Euro Tour product and the DraftKings product, and you will take a qualitative view on your preference. But that we're able to grow our business here and resonate with consumers in a meaningful way, and to go from the UK further afield as we expand internationally.
Cool. And for you?
Yeah, I think it's just around getting greater engagement on our platforms across the whole week. I mean, we have a problem, not a problem, but structurally with golf, it's very back focused and people seem to tune on and turn in a lot for the Sunday afternoon. We want to have that engagement across the whole week, and obviously also increase our outreach to different demographics, because golf is still viewed as very much a middle class, older sport, and we want to use products like this to try and appeal to new audiences. Great.
Well, unless anyone has one final question, which they don't, thank you very much, Jeffrey. Thank you very much, Rufus.
Thank you.
Thank you.